I wasn't supposed to win that day. Not against the law, not against the people who wrote it. However, when I heard my name and entered the courtroom, I realized silence would come at a greater cost than defeat. I fought to make it honest. And somehow, that fight made history.
The morning they came for me, I was watering my mother's garden. It was June in Richmond, Virginia, the kind of humid morning where the air sticks to your skin and you can smell the magnolias 3 houses down. My mother had passed 2 months earlier, and I'd moved into her small brick house on Chamberlain Avenue to settle her affairs. The petunias were wilting. She would have hated that. I heard the car doors slam before I saw them. 2 officers. One held a folder thick with documents. The other had his hand resting on his belt, not threatening, but ready. They walked up the cracked driveway with the kind of confidence that comes from being on the right side of the law. "Marcus Webb?" the taller one asked. "That's me. We need you to come with us. There's been a complaint filed regarding property ownership and zoning violations. You're being summoned to court." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you talking about? This is my mother's house. My house now." He glanced at his partner, then back at me. "Not according to the city records, sir. This property is listed under a deed restriction from 1961. You're in violation of residency laws." I stood there, hose still in hand, water pooling around my boots. 1961. That was the year my mother bought this house. A year when black families in Richmond were still being told where they could and couldn't live. A year when neighborhoods had invisible lines you didn't cross. And now, 64 years later, they were telling me I didn't belong here. "I'm not leaving," I said quietly. The officer sighed. "Then you'll need to appear in court. 2 weeks. If you don't show, there'll be a warrant." They handed me the summons and left. I stood in that garden for a long time after they drove away, staring at the paper in my hand. At the top, in bold letters, "Violation of Covenant Deed Restriction, Chamberlain Avenue Historic District." My hands shook, not from fear, from rage, because I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't about zoning. It wasn't about property laws or historic preservation. This was about race, about power, about a system that had been rigged long before I was born and was still running on the same broken code. My mother had fought to buy this house. She'd saved for years, worked double shifts at the hospital, endured cold shoulders from neighbors who didn't want her kind on their street. And she'd won. She'd made a home here, raised me here, and now they wanted to take it back. I looked down at the petunias, drooping in the heat. I thought about my mother's hands, dirt under her nails, planting those flowers every spring. I thought about the battles she'd fought that I never knew about, the quiet dignity she carried even when the world told her she wasn't enough. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them erase her. I wasn't going to let them erase us. I called my cousin Jamal that night. He was a paralegal in D.C., sharp as a tack, and the only person I knew who could make sense of legal jargon. "Marcus, man, you're dealing with a covenant deed. Those things are like ghosts. They're supposed to be dead, but they haunt you anyway," he said over the phone. "Technically, the Fair Housing Act should have killed it, but if the city's enforcing it now, someone powerful wants you out. Then I'll fight it. You can't fight this alone. You need a lawyer, a good one. I don't have money for that. Then you better find another way, because if you walk into that courtroom without ammunition, they'll bury you." He was right. I knew he was right. But I also knew something else. I wasn't going to run. Not from this house. Not from this fight. The next morning I started digging. I'd never been one to go through old boxes. My mother kept everything. Photos, letters, receipts from 40 years ago. I always thought it was clutter. But now, climbing the narrow stairs to the attic, I realized it might be the only weapon I had. The air up there was thick and dusty, shafts of sunlight cutting through the small window. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Marcus, baby clothes, Christmas decorations, important papers. I went straight for that last one. Inside were decades of documents, mortgage statements, tax records. And then, beneath a layer of yellowed newspaper clippings, I found it. The original deed to the house. My hands trembled as I unfolded the brittle paper. There, in faded ink, was my mother's signature. Beside it, a stamp from the Richmond City Clerk's office. And below that, in small print I almost missed, a single line, subject to covenant restrictions as recorded in Book 412, page 67. I grabbed my laptop and searched the county records database. It took me 2 hours, but I finally found it. The covenant from 1958, 3 years before my mother bought the house. The language was careful, clinical. It didn't say no black families. It said, property shall be occupied only by persons of the Caucasian race. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just history. This was the foundation they were using to remove me. A racist rule, buried in legal language, still being enforced 6 decades later. But here's what they didn't expect. I kept digging. I found letters my mother had saved. One from a lawyer she'd hired in 1961, confirming the sale was legal under the new fair housing guidelines. Another from the city, acknowledging her ownership. And a third, this one from 1987, where she'd formally requested the covenant be removed from the deed. The city had ignored her. For 38 years, they'd ignored her. And now they were using that same covenant to throw me out. I slammed the laptop shut and sat back in the dusty attic, breathing hard. My mother had fought this battle before me. She'd tried to make it right, and they'd silenced her. But they weren't going to silence me. I spent the next week reaching out to everyone I could think of. I called civil rights organizations, housing advocacy groups, even a few journalists. Most didn't respond. A couple said they'd look into it. One lawyer offered to help, for a $15,000 retainer I didn't have. I was running out of time. The court date was in 6 days. That's when I met Evelyn Torres. She walked into the coffee shop where I'd been camped out for hours. Laptop open, papers spread across the table. Mid-50s, sharp blazer, graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like someone who didn't waste time. "You Marcus Webb?" she asked. I looked up, startled. "Yeah. Who's asking?" "Evelyn Torres. I'm an attorney with the Housing Justice Collective. I heard about your case." I blinked. How? Word gets around when someone's fighting a covenant deed in 2025, especially in Richmond. She pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. "Mind if I take a look?" I slid the documents across the table. She read in silence, her expression darkening with every page. Finally, she looked up. "This is textbook discrimination. The covenant's unenforceable. Has been since 1968. Then why is the city pushing it? Because someone wants this land, and they're using an old law as cover." She tapped the deed. "But here's the thing. You've got proof the city knew this covenant was invalid. Your mother tried to get it removed. They ignored her. That's negligence. Possibly intentional." Hope flickered in my chest. "Can we win?" She smiled, but it was a warrior's smile. "We can make history." This story took place in a city that's seen its share of fights for justice. Can you guess which one? Drop the city name in the comments below. Let's see who's paying attention. The first sign came 2 days later. I was leaving the grocery store when I noticed the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street. It had been there when I went in. Still there 40 minutes later. I loaded my bags into the trunk, watching it from the corner of my eye. When I pulled out of the lot, it followed. My heart hammered as I took a deliberate turn down Maple Street, a residential area I had no reason to visit. The sedan stayed 3 cars back. I turned again. It turned. I wasn't imagining this. I drove straight to Evelyn's office downtown, parked in the public garage, and ran inside. When I looked back through the glass doors, the sedan was idling at the curb. Evelyn saw my face and didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her office and closed the door. "They're following me," I said, breathless. "I'm not surprised." She crossed her arms. "You filed a counterclaim yesterday. You're not just defending yourself anymore. You're accusing the city of systemic discrimination. That makes people nervous. What do I do? You keep going. You document everything. You don't let them intimidate you." She paused. "But Marcus, you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just a property dispute. You're challenging a system that's protected itself for decades. People have lost a lot more than houses for less." Her words hung in the air like smoke. "I'm not backing down," I said. "Good, because neither am I." And that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my mother's bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to move. I thought about my mother. About the nights she must have lain here in this same bed wondering if she'd made a mistake, wondering if it was worth it. She'd never told me how hard it had been. She'd carried that weight alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next morning, Evelyn called with news. We've got a hearing scheduled in 3 days. Judge Catherine Brennan. She's tough, but fair. If we present this right, we've got a real shot. What do we need? Everything. The deed, the letters, the covenant, your mother's request to have it removed. And I need you to testify. My stomach tightened. In front of everyone? In front of everyone. Your story is the case, Marcus. The documents prove the law, but you prove why it matters. I spent the next 72 hours preparing. Evelyn drilled me like a prosecutor. She made me repeat my testimony until my voice went hoarse. She anticipated every question, every objection, every trap the opposing counsel might set. They're going to try to make this about you, she warned. They'll say you're stirring up trouble, that you're playing the race card, that you're disrespecting history. What do I say? You tell the truth. You say your mother bought this house legally, that she paid every tax, followed every rule, that she was history. And they tried to erase her. Her eyes burned with conviction. You make them see her. Make them see you. Make them understand that this isn't about one house. It's about every family they've done this to. The night before the hearing, I sat in the garden again. The petunias had perked up. I'd been watering them every day the way my mother used to. I thought about what Jamal had said. You can't fight this alone. But I wasn't alone. I had Evelyn. I had my mother's memory. I had the truth. And sometimes that's enough. I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights, and made a promise. Mom, I'm going to finish what you started. I'm going to make them answer for what they did to you, to us, to everyone. The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I swear I felt her hand on my shoulder. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom, and I would fight. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, an American flag in the corner, its colors faded but still proud. Rows of benches filled with people, some I recognized from the neighborhood, others I'd never seen, reporters with notebooks, city officials in suits too expensive for public service. And at the front, behind a massive oak bench, sat Judge Catherine Brennan. She was in her 60s, silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked like someone who'd heard every excuse, every lie, every plea, someone who'd stopped being impressed a long time ago. Evelyn squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats at the defendant's table. Breathe, she whispered. You belong here. Across the aisle, the city's legal team set up camp. 3 lawyers, all sharp suits and leather briefcases. Leading them was a man I'd seen on billboards, Richard Caldwell, the city attorney. Silver-tongued, undefeated, and very clearly annoyed that his morning involved me. He didn't even look my way. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Circuit Court of Richmond is now in session. The Honorable Judge Catherine Brennan presiding. We stood. The judge entered, robes flowing, and sat with the kind of authority that made the room go silent. Be seated. Her voice was calm but commanding. She glanced at the docket. Case number 2025 CV 8847. City of Richmond versus Marcus Webb. Violation of covenant deed restriction. She looked up. Mr. Caldwell, you may begin. Richard Caldwell stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket like he was about to give a TED Talk. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of property law. The defendant, Marcus Webb, is in violation of a covenant deed dating back to 1958, which designates the Chamberlain Avenue Historic District for specific residential use. Mr. Webb has ignored lawful summons and has made inflammatory accusations against the city without merit. We ask the court to enforce the deed and order Mr. Webb to vacate the property immediately. He sat down. Clean, efficient, devastating. Judge Brennan turned to us. Ms. Torres? Evelyn stood, and I saw something shift in her posture. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a fighter stepping into the ring. Your Honor, this case is not about property law. It's about justice. The covenant Mr. Caldwell mentioned isn't just specific residential use. Or, it's a racist exclusion clause that was designed to keep black families out of white neighborhoods. And the city has known it was unenforceable for 57 years. But they've used it anyway to target my client. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand and silence fell. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Torres. I have documentation to prove it, Your Honor. Evelyn placed a folder on the bench. Letters from the city acknowledging the Fair Housing Act made such covenants illegal. Correspondence from Mr. Webb's late mother requesting the covenant be stricken from the deed, which the city ignored, and records showing that only properties in historically black neighborhoods are being targeted for enforcement. Caldwell shot to his feet. Objection. Counsel is grandstanding. Overruled. Judge Brennan's eyes were sharp. I'll review the documents. Continue, Ms. Torres. Evelyn didn't miss a beat. Your Honor, Marcus Webb's mother, Ruth Webb, bought that house in 1961. She worked 2 jobs to afford it. She paid every mortgage payment, every tax bill. She raised her son there. She earned that home. And when she tried to remove a racist restriction from her deed, the city ignored her. Her voice grew stronger. Now, 64 years later, they're using that same restriction to force her son out. Not because he's broken any law, but because he's inconvenient. Because his presence challenges a system that was designed to erase people like him. The room was dead silent. Judge Brennan leaned back in her chair. Mr. Caldwell, I assume you have a response? Caldwell stood, but for the first time he looked rattled. Your Honor, the city's position is that historical covenants, regardless of origin, are part of the legal record. We're simply enforcing existing code. Existing code that's been illegal since 1968? The judge interrupted. Caldwell's jaw tightened. The covenant remains on file. That makes it enforceable under property statutes. Does it? Judge Brennan's tone was ice. We'll see. She turned to me. Mr. Webb, I'd like to hear from you. My heart stopped. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I forgot the words Evelyn and I had practiced. I forgot everything except the suffocating weight of expectation. Judge Brennan's expression softened just slightly. Take your time, Mr. Webb. I cleared my throat, gripped the edge of the table, and I began. Your Honor, my mother's name was Ruth Webb. She was a nurse at Johnston Memorial Hospital for 33 years. She worked nights, weekends, holidays, whatever it took to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. When she bought our house in 1961, she was told she was lucky. Lucky to be allowed to buy on Chamberlain Avenue. Lucky the neighbors didn't run her off. Lucky the bank approved her loan at all. I looked around the courtroom, at the reporters scribbling notes, at the city officials avoiding my gaze, at the strangers who'd come to watch. She didn't feel lucky. She felt like she'd earned it. Because she had. I pulled out the folder Evelyn had prepared. In 1987, my mother found out about the covenant on her deed. She didn't know it was there when she bought the house. But when she found it, she did what any good citizen would do. She asked the city to remove it. I held up the letter. This is their response. Or actually, this is no response. Because they never answered her. They just ignored it. For 38 years. My hands shook. She died 2 months ago. And 6 weeks later, they came to my door with that same covenant. The one she tried to erase. The one they pretended didn't exist until it was useful. I locked eyes with Judge Brennan. I'm not fighting to keep a house, Your Honor. I'm fighting to keep my mother's dignity. I'm fighting so that the city can't bury people just because it's convenient. I'm fighting because if I don't, they'll do this to someone else, and someone else, and someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Brennan nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Webb. You may be seated. I sat, my legs nearly giving out. Evelyn's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, her tone sharp. I've reviewed the documents Ms. Torres submitted. I have a question. If the city knew this covenant was unenforceable, why is it still attached to the deed? Caldwell stood, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. Your Honor, the city's records department maintains historical documents for archival purposes. The covenant remains on file as a matter of historical record, not as enforceable policy. Then why, Judge Brennan asked, leaning forward, is Mr. Webb being threatened with eviction based on that historical record? Caldwell hesitated. The complaint was filed by a third party, not the city directly. A third party? Who? That information is part of a separate civil matter and not relevant to... Not relevant? The judge's voice could have cut steel. Mr. Caldwell, you're asking this court to enforce a law that you admit is historical only. That's not how the law works. Caldwell's face flushed. Your Honor, the city is simply following procedure. Procedure based on a covenant that violates federal law. Judge Brennan removed her glasses. Ms. Torres, do you have evidence that other properties have been similarly targeted? Evelyn stood. Yes, Your Honor. In the past 5 years, 12 families in historically black neighborhoods have been served with similar violations, all involving covenant deeds, none in predominantly white neighborhoods. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Brennan slammed her gavel. Order. She turned to Caldwell. I'm going to ask you one more time. Who filed the initial complaint against Mr. Webb? Caldwell's jaw worked. Finally, he spoke. The complaint was filed by Greystone Development Corporation. My blood went cold. Greystone. I knew that name. Everyone in Richmond knew that name. They were the company buying up property across the city, tearing down old neighborhoods to build luxury condos and shopping centers. They wanted my mother's house. They wanted the whole block, and they'd used a racist law to try to take it. Judge Brennan's expression darkened. This court is in recess. I'll issue a ruling tomorrow morning. The gavel fell. I sat in the kitchen, staring at my phone. Messages had been pouring in all evening, from neighbors, from strangers, from people who'd read about the case online. Some supportive, some hateful, most somewhere in between. One message made my skin crawl. You should have taken the offer when you had the chance. Now you'll lose everything. Unknown number. No name. I showed it to Evelyn when she called to check in. Block it, she said immediately. Don't respond. Don't engage. What offer? I asked. I never got an offer. There was a pause on her end. Marcus, I need you to think carefully. Did anyone approach you before the city filed the complaint? Anyone from Greystone? A real estate agent? Someone offering to buy the house? I thought back, and then it hit me. 3 months ago, a man in a gray suit had knocked on my door, said he was a property consultant, said he represented investors interested in revitalizing the neighborhood. He'd offered me a lowball price for the house, barely enough to cover my mother's medical bills. I told him no. There was someone, I said slowly, right after my mother died. That's it, Evelyn said, her voice tight. They tried to buy you out. When you refused, they used the covenant to force you out. Marcus, this is worse than we thought. How much worse? They're not just targeting you. This is a systematic effort to displace residents and acquire land cheaply, and they're using the city's own records to do it. I felt sick. Can we prove it? I'm working on it, but we need more time, and that's something we might not have. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread overnight. The local news had picked up the story. Racist covenant used to evict black homeowner. Developer accused of exploiting loophole to seize property. The headlines were everywhere. Judge Brennan entered, and the room fell silent. She didn't waste time. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. I've also conducted my own research into the history of covenant deeds in Richmond and the enforcement patterns over the past decade. She looked directly at Caldwell. What I found is deeply troubling. Caldwell remained stone-faced. The covenant attached to Mr. Webb's property is, without question, unenforceable under federal law. It has been since the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The fact that it remains on file is an administrative oversight. The fact that it was used as grounds for eviction is unconscionable. My chest tightened with hope. Furthermore, Judge Brennan continued, the evidence suggests a pattern of selective enforcement targeting minority homeowners. That pattern indicates not only negligence, but potential discrimination under both state and federal statutes. She turned to me. Mr. Webb, this court finds in your favor. The violation notice is dismissed. The covenant is hereby declared null and void, and I'm ordering the city to remove it, and all similar covenants, from public record within 90 days. Relief crashed over me like a wave, but she wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into Greystone Development Corporation and any city officials who may have facilitated this scheme. If there's evidence of collusion or fraud, there will be consequences. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Spectators cheered and gasped. Caldwell stood stiffly. Your Honor, the city intends to appeal. You're welcome to try, Mr. Caldwell, but I suggest you spend your time cleaning up your records instead. Her gaze was withering. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. I sat there stunned. Evelyn grabbed my arm, grinning. We won, she said. Marcus, we actually won. But it didn't feel real yet. Not until I walked out of that courtroom and saw the faces of the people waiting outside. Neighbors from Chamberlain Avenue. Families who'd been pushed out of their homes. Activists who'd been fighting these battles for years. They clapped. They cheered. One older woman, tears streaming down her face, grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did what we couldn't." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my house. It never had been. 3 days after the ruling, I received a letter. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper with a list of names and addresses. 12 families. 12 homes. All in historically black neighborhoods across Richmond. All targeted with covenant deed violations. All forced out before they could fight back. My house had been number 13. I sat at my mother's kitchen table staring at that list and felt rage I didn't know I could contain. These weren't just addresses. They were lives. Histories. Communities erased by loopholes and greed. I called Evelyn. "We need to do something," I said. "We are doing something. The Attorney General's office is investigating. That'll take years. These people don't have years. They've already lost their homes." She was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we find them. We tell them what happened. We help them fight back. Marcus, you just won your case. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." My voice was firm. "My mother spent 38 years being ignored. I'm not going to ignore these people." Another pause, then. "All right, I'll make some calls. But Marcus, this is going to be a long fight, and it's going to get ugly. Then we better get started." Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn and I tracked down 8 of the 12 families on the list. Some had moved out of state. Others had lost everything and were living with relatives or in shelters. A few refused to talk, the wounds too fresh, the fight too exhausting. But 3 agreed to meet with us. The first was James Butler, a 72-year-old veteran who'd lived on Monroe Street for 40 years. Greystone had bought his house at auction after he'd been evicted for a covenant violation. He now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. We met him at a diner. He was frail but sharp-eyed, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. "I tried to fight it," he said. "But I didn't have a lawyer, didn't have money. They said if I didn't leave, they'd arrest me." He looked at me. "You got lucky, son. Most of us don't." "It wasn't luck," Evelyn said gently. "It was illegal. What they did to you was illegal. Then why'd they get away with it?" She didn't have an answer for that. The second family was the Johnsons, a couple in their 50s who'd lost their home on West Clay Street. They'd raised 3 kids there. Now they were renting month to month, barely making ends meet. "We thought we were doing something wrong," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice breaking. "They made us feel like criminals, like we didn't deserve to be there." Mr. Johnson clenched his fists. "I worked my whole life for that house, and they took it with a piece of paper I didn't even know existed." The third was a young single mother named Kia Ross, 28 years old, 2 kids, had inherited her grandmother's house on Duval Street. Greystone had forced her out 6 months ago. "I didn't even get a hearing," she said, anger flashing in her eyes. "They just showed up with cops and told me I had 24 hours. I had to leave my grandmother's furniture, her pictures, everything." She looked at me with something between hope and desperation. "Can you really help us?" I glanced at Evelyn. She nodded. "We're going to try," I said. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about James Butler's trembling hands, about the Johnsons' grief, about Kia Ross's grandmother's furniture, left behind in an empty house. I thought about my mother, about how close I'd come to losing everything she'd built. And I realized something. Winning my case wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Not while there were others still suffering. Not while a system designed to erase us was still running. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I started typing. A petition. A website, a call to action, justice for Chamberlain Avenue, and every street like it. By morning, I'd written 10 pages. By the end of the week, I'd gathered 200 signatures. By the end of the month, we'd filed a class action lawsuit. The first threat arrived in my mailbox. A letter with cut-out magazine letters, like something from a bad movie. "Drop the lawsuit or lose more than your house." I reported it to the police. They took a statement, filed a report, and told me there wasn't much they could do without evidence. The second threat was a brick through my living room window. I was in the kitchen when I heard the crash. Glass exploded across the floor. A rock the size of my fist lay in the middle of the room, a note tied around it with rubber bands. "We know where you live." I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the shattered window, at the note, at the violation of my space, my safety. This was my mother's house, my home. And they were trying to take it from me all over again. Evelyn insisted I file a police report. I did. She also insisted I install security cameras. I did that too. And when she suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights, I refused. If I leave, they win, I said. If you stay and something happens to you, we all lose. Her voice was sharp with worry. Marcus, these people are dangerous. They have money, power. They're not going to roll over just because a judge ruled against them. Then what do you want me to do? Hide? I want you to be smart. We stared at each other, the tension crackling between us. Finally, I sighed. I'll be careful, but I'm not leaving. She shook her head, frustrated but resigned. Fine, but if anything else happens, you call me immediately, and maybe consider sleeping somewhere other than the bedroom facing the street. The class action lawsuit moved forward despite the threats. We'd gathered 23 families willing to join the case. 23 stories of homes stolen, lives uprooted, communities destroyed. The media attention intensified. Local news became regional. Regional became national. Suddenly, I was being asked to appear on morning shows, podcasts, and documentaries. It was overwhelming, but it was also powerful. Because every time I told my story, someone else found the courage to tell theirs. One evening, I got a call from a woman in Atlanta, then a man in Charlotte, then entire families in Memphis, Birmingham, and New Orleans. All of them had experienced the same thing: covenant deeds, forced evictions, properties sold to developers for pennies on the dollar. This wasn't just a Richmond problem. It was everywhere. Evelyn started coordinating with lawyers in other states. The class action expanded. The case grew. And suddenly we weren't just fighting for a neighborhood, we were fighting for a reckoning. But the bigger the fight got, the harder they pushed back. Greystone Development hired a PR firm. Suddenly articles started appearing online painting me as an opportunist, a troublemaker, someone exploiting racial tensions for personal gain. They dug into my past, found a bar fight from when I was 22, a tax return I'd filed late, a speeding ticket from 3 years ago. They tried to make me look like a criminal. The comment sections were vicious. People I'd never met called me things I won't repeat, said I was playing the victim, said I should be grateful anyone wanted my dump of a house. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. But then I'd get a message from someone like Kia Ross, telling me she'd been contacted by a lawyer who wanted to help her, or James Butler, saying he'd decided to join the lawsuit after all. And I'd remember why I was doing this. Not for approval, not for praise, for justice. 6 weeks after we filed the class action, we got word that Greystone was willing to settle. Evelyn called me, barely able to contain her excitement. They're offering a $10 million settlement fund for the families, full restitution for anyone who lost their home, and they'll stop using covenant deeds. I should have been thrilled, but something felt wrong. What's the catch? She hesitated. You have to sign an NDA. No more media appearances. No more activism. You take the money and disappear. My stomach turned. They want to buy my silence. It's not just yours. It's everyone's. But Marcus, $10 million could change these families' lives. And an NDA would make sure this never happens again? I asked. Make sure they can't do this to someone else? Silence. That's what I thought. Marcus, we're not settling. Not like this. If we don't settle, we could lose at trial. These families could end up with nothing. Or we could win and set a precedent, create real change. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. This is what I admire about you, and what scares me. You're willing to risk everything for a principle. My mother risked everything for a home. I can risk everything for what's right. She laughed softly. All right, let's go to trial. The courtroom was different this time. Larger, federal, with marble columns, and the weight of history pressing down from every corner. This wasn't just Richmond anymore. This was the Fourth Circuit Court, and the eyes of the nation were watching. Judge Harold Martinez presided, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness and a low tolerance for theatrics. He'd made it clear from the first hearing: stick to the facts, respect the process, and don't waste his time. Greystone's legal team had doubled. 10 lawyers now, led by Margaret Keene, a corporate attorney known for dismantling class actions before they reached a jury. She was polished, calculated, and ruthless. Evelyn had assembled her own team, 3 other civil rights attorneys, all volunteering their time. They were outgunned and outspent, but they believed. I sat at the plaintiff's table with James Butler, the Johnsons, Kia Ross, and 19 other families. We weren't just names on a docket anymore. We were a movement. The opening statement set the tone. Margaret Keene spoke first, her voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is not about racism. It's not about corporate greed. It's about property law. The plaintiffs purchased homes with existing deed restrictions. They were informed of these restrictions. They chose to proceed. Now, when those restrictions are enforced, they claim victimization. She gestured dismissively. Greystone Development Corporation is a legitimate business following legal procedures. The plaintiffs want to rewrite history, rewrite contracts, and profit from their own misunderstanding of the law. We ask that you see through the emotion and focus on the facts. She sat down to scattered applause from the Greystone side of the room. Then Evelyn stood. She didn't walk to the center of the room. She didn't gesture dramatically. She simply looked at the jury, 12 people from different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, different lives, and spoke from the heart. Members of the jury, Ms. Keene wants you to believe this is about paperwork, about contracts and technicalities. But let me ask you something. When you bought your home, did you read every single word of every single document? Did you hire a lawyer to explain century-old restrictions buried in county records? She paused. Most people don't, because most people trust the system to be fair, to be honest. Her voice grew stronger. These families trusted the system. They worked hard, saved money, bought homes, and then that system turned on them. It used laws written to exclude them, laws that should have been dead for 60 years, to take everything they'd built. She pointed to Greystone's table. And that corporation? They didn't stumble onto these restrictions by accident. They searched for them. They weaponized them. Because it was cheaper than paying fair market value. Evelyn turned back to the jury. This trial isn't about property law. It's about whether we, as a society, will allow history's injustices to be recycled for profit. It's about whether these families, your neighbors, your community, deserve the dignity of the homes they earned. The room was silent. We believe they do. And we believe you will too. She sat down. Judge Martinez nodded. Let's proceed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. We heard testimony from city officials who admitted the covenants were unenforceable, but claimed they had no duty to remove them. We heard from real estate experts who explained how Greystone had systematically targeted properties with these restrictions. We heard from historians who detailed the racist origins of covenant deeds and their lasting impact. And we heard from the families. James Butler testified about the day police escorted him from his home. Mrs. Johnson broke down describing her children's confusion when they were suddenly homeless. Kia Ross spoke about losing her grandmother's legacy. Each story was devastating. Each story was true. Greystone's defense tried to discredit us. They brought in their own experts who claimed the evictions were justified. They argued that the families had been fairly compensated because they received notice. But the jury wasn't buying it. I could see it in their faces, the way they leaned forward during our testimony, the way they frowned during Greystone's excuses. On the final day, Evelyn called me to the stand. Mr. Webb, she said gently, why are you here? I looked at the jury, at the judge, at the family sitting behind me, because someone has to say enough. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I paced my mother's house, walking the same path she must have walked decades ago when she fought her own battles. Evelyn called every few hours to check in, but there was nothing to report. The jury was locked in deliberation, and all we could do was wait. On the morning of the third day, we got the call. They've reached a verdict, Evelyn said. We need to be there in an hour. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. Press lined the walls. The families sat together, holding hands, praying quietly. Judge Martinez entered, and we rose. Be seated. He looked to the jury foreman. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please read it. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. She unfolded a piece of paper, and my heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. In the matter of Webb et al. Versus Greystone Development Corporation, on the count of fraudulent misrepresentation, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. The room erupted. People gasped, cheered, cried. Order, Judge Martinez said, but even he was suppressing a smile. The foreman continued. On the count of discriminatory enforcement, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. On the count of unjust enrichment, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. Evelyn grabbed my hand, tears streaming down her face. The jury awards compensatory damages in the amount of $42 million to be distributed among the plaintiffs. We further recommend punitive damages in the amount of $100 million. The room exploded. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. We'd won. Not just won. We'd made history. Judge Martinez banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. The jury's verdict is accepted and entered into record. Additionally, this court orders Greystone Development Corporation to return all properties obtained through covenant deed enforcement and to cease all such practices immediately. He looked directly at Greystone's legal team. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. If there's evidence of conspiracy or fraud, prosecution will follow. Margaret Keene sat frozen, her face pale. Judge Martinez turned to us. Mr. Webb, Ms. Torres, on behalf of this court and, I believe, on behalf of justice itself, thank you. The gavel fell one last time. And then, chaos. The aftermath was surreal. News outlets from around the world covered the verdict. Civil rights organizations praised the decision as a landmark moment. Law schools began teaching the case. And most importantly, families started coming forward, not just in Virginia, but across the country, demanding investigations into similar schemes. The $100 million in punitive damages became a fund to help other victims. Evelyn established a nonprofit to continue the work. James Butler got his house back. So did the Johnsons. So did Kia Ross. 23 families were made whole, and countless others now had a roadmap to fight back. 6 months after the verdict, I stood in my mother's garden, planting petunias. It was spring again, the kind of morning where the air smells like fresh earth and possibility. The neighborhood was changing, not being torn down but being rebuilt. Families were moving back. Children were playing in yards that had been empty for years. Chamberlain Avenue was alive again. I thought about my mother, about the battles she'd fought in silence, about the dignity she'd carried even when the world tried to strip it away. I finished what you started, Mom, I whispered, and I made sure your name would be remembered. A breeze rustled through the trees and I felt her presence, proud, peaceful, free. That day in the courtroom I wasn't supposed to win, but I did, not because I was special, not because I was fearless, but because I refused to be silent. And sometimes that's all it takes to make history. Now it's your turn. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between silence and standing up? Share your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other. Because every voice matters, including yours. And if this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Someone needs to know they're not alone in their fight. From the Touching Stories family to yours, keep fighting, keep believing, keep making history.